Hello, and welcome to the latest episode of KRAD COVID Readings. I'm Keith R.A. DeCandido, trying to calm the coronavirus craziness by reading my writing, and one of my cats is trying to break into the pantry. We'll see how that goes for him. Anyway, what I'm going to read for you today is the second short story I wrote in the world of Dragon Precinct. The first one was Getting the Chair, which I read in an earlier KRAD COVID reading. Getting the Chair came out in an anthology called Murder by Magic, which was published the same month as the first edition of Dragon Precinct in 2004. The next story I wrote was called Crime of Passion. I actually submitted it to one of the Chicks in Chainmail anthologies that Esther Friesner did. I previously published a collaboration in one of the earlier Chicks anthologies called A Bone to Pick, which I've also read on an earlier KRAD COVID reading. Esther didn't go for it. I also submitted it to Marion Zimmer Bradley's Sword and Sorcery magazine, which also didn't go for it. And then Patrick Thomas and C.J. Henderson said they were putting together an anthology called Hear Them Roar, which was a collection of fantasy stories with strong female protagonists. And since Danthres Tresillian definitely qualifies, I submitted this, and they not only accepted it, they made it the lead story in the anthology. Hear Them Roar was then later published. It was originally published by Spire, which was an imprint of Wilder Press, and then Wilder Press kind of fell apart, and then it was published by, I think, Mundania Press? I actually lost track of it, but then they went out of business. A bunch of people tried to approach Dark Quest Books, who were publishing the Precinct books at the time, with possibly picking up the anthology, and the publisher of Dark Quest said, nah, it's already killed 2 publishers. Of course, Dark Quest doesn't really exist anymore either, so probably wouldn't have hurt one way or the other. Anyway, without further ado, here is Crime of Passion from the world of Dragon Precinct. Be careful! The blood's everywhere! Lieutenant Danthres Tresillian of the Cliff's End Castle Guard saw that the young guard spoke true. Blood spattered the walls, windows, and even the ceiling of the small house. Rivulets of blood flowed across the unevenly laid wooden floor, pooling in odd places. Both she and her partner, Lieutenant Torin Van Wieveld, had to lift their brown cloaks of rank to make sure they weren't stained. As it was, their boots were going to need a good cleaning, and Danthres wondered if she could talk Captain Osric into requisitioning a laundry spell. It was the only way to get the stains completely out. All of those pools led back to the 3 bodies sprawled in the middle of the room. 1 female adult and 2 male children. Danthres turned to the guard. Like Danthres and Torin, he wore the black leather armor of the guard. Unlike the lieutenants, he did not wear a cloak since he was only a foot soldier. His armor was adorned with the symbol of Dragon Precinct, the location of the house, the middle-class section of Cliff's End. What have we got? A woman's named Tybet Nurban, and the boys are 2 sons, Leaston and Baikir. She's married to Sebru Nurban. He's the boy's father, and the one who called this in. Says he came home from his morning run and found them like this. I've got him back in the pantry. There's no sign of forced entry, and nothing's been stolen. While the guard spoke, Danthres took a closer look at the bodies. All 3 of them had been ripped to pieces. The woman's throat was almost entirely gone, and one of the boys' heads was caved in, which right there accounted for most of the blood. Nothing bleeds quite so spectacularly as throat and head wounds, she thought. The woman's arms were positioned in such a way that it looked like she tried to defend herself. There were some kind of claw marks on her forearms that looked like defensive wounds. Of course, why anyone would think a forearm would be of any use against something that could rip out your throat is another story. Then again, Danthres had been investigating crimes in Cliff's End for a decade. She had yet to find a murder that made sense, especially when children were involved. Who do you think was killed first? The guard, whose name was Kellen, asked. Danthres shot the young man a look. Hoping to get some tips on crime solving? She said nastily. She had very little patience with grunts who had delusions of intelligence. No, ma'am, Kellen said, uncharacteristically unintimidated by Danthres' tone. He must be new, she thought. I was just curious. Not that it matters much, but I guess the mother was killed first, since the children are on top. The children were mauled and dropped on top of her. The guard winced. I wonder what's worse, watching your kids die or watching your mother die? Torin finally spoke. Hope you never find out, Kellen. I believe you said the father is in the pantry? Yes, sir. And the ME's on the way? He sent a mage bird that he'd be here in a quarter of an hour. Kellen frowned. That was about a quarter of an hour ago, actually. And what is all this blood doing here? Danthres turned to see Benin, the magical examiner, standing in the doorway, an even more peevish than normal expression on his wrinkled face. Torin grinned as the elderly wizard entered. "Apologies, Benin, but it seems the owners of the blood sprung a leak." Glowering at Torin, Benin said, "Stick with police work, Banwivel. You're ill-suited to the role of wit." Benin was on loan from the Brotherhood of Wizards to provide magical services for the guard. The loan was at Lord Albin's insistence. That it was Benin was at the Brotherhood's. Danthres was of the considered opinion that he got the job so the other members of the Brotherhood didn't have to listen to him complain. However, he did his job of magical examiner well. His primary duty was to perform a peelback spell that read the psychic resonances on inanimate objects. Generally, this meant he could reconstruct the crime, thus simplifying Danthres' job immensely. "Let him get to work," Torin said to Kellen. "Canvass the area, see if anyone saw anything." Since this was Dragon, there was at least a chance that one of the neighbors might be civic-minded enough to report that if they had witnessed something useful. If this were the lower-class Goblin Precinct or the Docklands of Mermaid Precinct, the chances of finding a cooperative witness were all but non-existent. "We'll be in the pantry questioning Nurbin." Danthres started toward the pantry door. "I doubt this'll take long. This looks like a straightforward crime of passion. No forced entry, no sign of any mayhem inside the house except the bodies, nothing stolen. I'm willing to bet the knife he used to slice them to ribbons is still in the kitchen." Ma'am?" Kellen said. "I don't think he did it. He doesn't really strike me as the type." Stopping in her tracks and whirling on the guard, Danthres said, "And on the very off chance that someday you wear a brown cloak, I will consider your opinion relevant. In the meantime, get out there and canvass, or I'll put you on the detail that has to clean this house by yourself. Am I understood, guard?" "Yes, ma'am," Kellen said with a nod and calmly walked out the door. Benin chuckled. "You must be losing your touch, Tresillian. They used to tremble at your very utterance." Danthres bit back a retort. It wouldn't do to kill Benin. There'd be paperwork. The two detectives entered the pantry, leaving the magical examiner to perform the peelback. The room was unbearably hot. Danthres saw that the stove in the center of the room was still warm. The door opened to reveal cooling wood. From the looks of it, the stove had been in use only a few hours before. The remnants of the morning meal were on the table, probably the result of the stove's use. The only foodstuffs still intact were 2 biscuits, which smelled heavenly even hours after they'd been cooked. Standing at the cupboard next to the table was a pale, middle-aged man with a wispy mustache. His skinny arms and pudgy belly indicated someone who did not perform physical labor. He seemed to be arranging the items in the cupboard so that they would be neater. At Danthres and Torin's entrance, he turned to face them. "Mr. Nurbin, I'm Lieutenant Tresillian, and this is my partner, Lieutenant Banwivel." Torin waved and smiled. "We're investigating the death of your wife and sons." "Of course." Nurbin straightened his purple tunic carefully and sat down in one of the chairs next to the table. "The guard said you would be by. I am happy to help in whatever way I can." Sebru Nurbin spoke in a monotone and was careful to enunciate every word. "What do you do for a living, Mr. Nurbin?" "I work at the bank as a clerk. I came home from my morning run. I run every morning now. I have been doing it for 7 weeks, since I do not like how fat I am getting. And when I arrived, I saw that Tybet and the boys were lying dead on the floor. I immediately summoned a guard. He told me to sit out here in the pantry, and I have remained here ever since then, waiting for you to come and question me." Danthres had to shake her head to keep herself awake, and was starting to understand why Kellen didn't think Nurbin was capable of the crime. Not that I'm going to tell him that at any point. "When did you go for your run?" "Right at sunrise. I always go for my run right at sunrise." He started to arrange the plates on the table so that they were all in a line. "So you had breakfast before that?" Nurbin shook his head. "I did not, no. I stopped eating breakfast when I started running." She pointed at the table with its newly organized settings. "So all this was for Tybet and the boys?" "Yes." "What about the extra biscuits?" Torin asked. At that, Nurbin shrugged, an action which put his tunic out of place. He straightened it as he spoke. "I would assume that Tybet made more than she and the boys could eat. She did that sometimes. I always thought it was wasteful, but Tybet never listened to me wherever food was involved." "So you came back from the run," Torin said. "Open the door." No, the door was open. On nice days like this, Tybet usually left the door open to ventilate the house because it got so hot inside. "That's safe." "Oh yes, this is a very safe neighborhood. This is a very good part of town, Lieutenant. Bad things never happen here." "Until today," Danthres said. "Well, yes, obviously, until today." Danthres asked a few more questions, told Nurbin that they'd send someone to take the bodies and clean the house, and then went outside via the back door to avoid disturbing Benin. Kellen met up with them and reported that nobody saw anyone enter or leave the house, including Nurbin himself, and that the door was, in fact, open. 2 different neighbors mentioned that, actually, Kellen said. One said that it was great that they left the door open because he could smell the food from the kitchen. The other one complained for the same reason. I got the idea that his wife isn't a very good cook, he added with a smile. Danthres did not return the smile. Save the commentary, guard? At last, Kellen looked intimidated. Yes, ma'am. In any case, one person heard screaming, but she couldn't make it out, and nobody else heard anything unusual. They all said that the family was very quiet, never got into any arguments, except the children when they got up to being raucous the way boys are, and that the Nurbins were nice people. Oh, and that Nurbin always went out of his way to never hurt anyone or anything. He wouldn't even kill the vermin in his house. Sighing, Danthres said, "All right, when Bonine's done, get some guards in here, do a sweep, see if you can find a murder weapon, and don't let Nurbin out of your sight." Torin made a noise like a bursting pipe. "Danthres, that's crazy. Nurbin didn't kill them." Looking at her partner like he had grown a second head, Danthres said, "Of course he killed them. There was no forced entry, nothing stolen, no other damage to the house or anything around it. It had to be him." "A non-violent bank clerk is your murderer?" Torin asked dubiously. "That man in there isn't capable of killing anyone." "I agree with the lieutenant, ma'am," Kellen started. Danthres turned on the guard. "At what point did you attempt to grow a brain? Just go do what you're told, guard. Understood? Now get that detail together." Kellen moved off to do that. "As for you, I should think that after 10 years you'd trust my judgment a bit." "Sorry," Torin said, "but I'm too busy trusting mine. That man didn't kill anyone." Before Danthres could respond, Bonine interrupted, exiting the house into the sunny fall day. Danthres noted with annoyance that there was no evidence of bloodstains on the ME's person, though his hands were stained black from the residue from the peelback. "Of course that man didn't," the old wizard said. "It was a Hrancet demon." "It can't be a Hrancet demon," Danthres said. "Of course it can," Bonine said. "Probably some idiot teenager conjured one and let it run around loose. This entire mess fits in with a Hrancet demon. They have claws that match the wounds on all 3 bodies, and they tend toward random, unfocused violence." Danthres shook her head. "No." Torin sighed. "Danthres, stop it." "Stop what?" "I know that look on your face. This is going to be another one of your crusades." Danthres' face contorted into a look of fury. "It is not a crusade, Torin." "But you said that Hrancet demons tend toward unfocused violence." The magical examiner nodded. "This was not unfocused. There was no damage to the doorframe, the furniture, the rest of the house, nothing." "2 witnesses said the door was left open, Danthres," Torin said slowly. "The demon could have just run in and killed them. You're letting the fact that children were murdered cloud your judgment." That got Danthres' blood boiling. "This has nothing to do with the fact that children are involved. It has to do with 10 years of instincts telling me that this wasn't a Hrancet demon." Sharply, Bonine said, "I'll see your 10 years and raise you several centuries of magicking. My peelback showed a Hrancet demon. Therefore, it was a Hrancet demon. I am now going to go back to the castle and cast a spell that should track this particular Hrancet demon down. Once I do, you can fetch it and put it down, and the case will be closed, and Captain Osric can praise you both for a job well done after I've done all the actual work." Before Danthres had the chance to weigh whether or not it would be worth the paperwork to kill the ME, Bonine then disappeared in a burst of light, which he only did when he felt like having the last word, since the teleportation spell generally took a lot out of him. Danthres blinked the spots out of her eyes, cursing her sensitive eyesight. The elven half of her heritage had blessed her with better than normal eyesight, but it also meant that magical light shows had a more profound impact on her ability to see. "Come on," Danthres said, starting her walk toward the castle. "It'll be hours before Bonine casts that spell." Torin nodded. "Of course, we'll need a good nap after the teleport spell, and you'll need time to calm down." "I'm perfectly calm!" That earned her a dubious look from Torin. She sighed. "Look, I know what you're thinking. I'm sure you do. I'm thinking about that accused child murderer you almost beat to a pulp 2 years ago, the one who turned out to be innocent." His voice softened when he added, "And I'm also thinking about that elf you killed in Brunwick." Danthres continued walking, refusing to dignify Torin's diatribe with a response. She had encountered a mass grave of infants who, like Danthres, were born of a human and an elf, but who, unlike Danthres, were not permitted to live beyond 1 month, thanks to the snobbery of full-blooded elves in general, and one highborn elf in particular, who took it upon himself to keep the elven bloodlines pure. "Maybe I do take it a little personally when children are killed," she thought, but refused to say out loud, not wanting to give her partner the satisfaction. "But Nurbin killed his wife and kids, and it's not because I'm still trying to take revenge for all those slaughtered children. No matter what the peelback said, this is not the work of a Hrancet demon." A day later, a storm front had moved in. blanketing Cliff's End in rain. Bonine had yet to find the Rancid Demon. Torin and Danthres were spending their morning in the squad room of guard headquarters, located in the eastern wing of the Lord and Lady's castle. Torin had acquired a stuffed-up nose thanks to the inclement weather and was partaking of a mug of tea, while Danthres, whose sterner constitution allowed her to stave off the cold, chewed on one of the pastries that Sergeant Jonas's wife always made, which was soggier than usual thanks to the weather. Torin expressed surprise at the Emmy's inability to track the demon, which prompted Danthres to fly off on a rant. "It's not as if we're dealing with a subtle beast here. A rancid demon habitually runs amok, ripping anything to pieces that happens to get in its way or look at it funny. It usually leaves dozens of bodies in its wake. I remember hearing about one in Treemark. It killed over 50 people before a local wizard managed to banish the thing. Yet somehow, this rancid demon has targeted only one woman and 2 children, and nobody and nothing else in all of Cliff's End. I'm telling you, we should be questioning the husband." Bonine said it was a rancid demon. Torin followed his statement with a sniffle. Danthres pointed her pastry at Torin as if it were a dagger. "Don't you dare throw that old fool in my face, Torin. It'll be more than your nose that's stuffed up. Bonine is a cranky old idiot who hates being forced into this job. Who still takes pride in his work," Torin added. "He's never given us reason to doubt his peelbacks in the past. But," he said quickly before Danthres could give him a sharp reply, "let's allow for a second that you're right, as this is a crime of passion." "Adieu!" He sneezed and took a sip of tea. "You really think the husband did it?" "Let's get him in the interview room. I promise that inside of an hour he'll tell us precisely how he did it." "In a dull monotone, no doubt. Honestly, Danthres, you talk to him. He's a bank clerk. In order to commit a crime of passion, you have to have some. Furthermore, even if he did kill them, he wouldn't have slashed at random parts of their bodies, and he wouldn't have left the corpses just lying haphazardly in the middle of the floor. The entire time we were there, he was neatening things, putting them in order. That is not someone who carves up 3 people like he was hacking his way through the jungle." Danthres started fuming for several seconds, covering the action by chewing the rest of her pastry, which, owing to its sogginess, took longer than usual. After swallowing it, she said in a low voice, "I hate it when you're right." "No wonder you're always in a bad mood. I'm usually right." Torin grinned broadly, his teeth showing through his thick red beard. Then the grin fell. "Of course, that doesn't explain why Bonine saw a rancid demon in the peelback, or why he can't find it now." He took another bite of pastry. "One thing we hadn't considered. That someone conjured the rancid demon for the express purpose of killing the Nurbans and then banished it." Shaking her head, Danthres said, "I don't like that. Only a particularly powerful wizard could accomplish that, and if that's so, we're going to have the Brotherhood all over this case. That's not the sort of thing that improves my mood." "Or Osric's," Torin added, and then pulled a handkerchief out of a pocket in his belt. Anytime magic was involved, the Brotherhood of Wizards tended to interfere in the castle guard's investigation, usually to the detriment of the investigation's efficiency. Captain Osric didn't share Danthres' disdain for the practice of magic, but he had a severe hatred for the bureaucracy that administered it. Torin blew his nose, and then said, "Even so, it seems to me that our next obvious step is to question Mr. Durbin and see if he might know anything about a wizard with a grudge against him or his family." For the first time since they got the call to the Nurbin house, Danthres smiled. "I knew I kept you around for a reason." Danthres had one of the guards bring Nurbin in, with particular instructions not to take his cloak, assuming he had one to protect against the rain. He did, and the guard dutifully left it on as he brought the bank clerk into the featureless room with a single lantern hanging from the center of the ceiling. "Thank you for coming in, Mr. Durbin," Torin said in his most pleasant voice. "Let me take your cloak." As he removed the sodden cloak from Nurbin's person, the pudgy man said, "Thank you. You seem ill today, Lieutenant." Torin dropped the cloak rather unceremoniously on the table, even as Nurbin sat in one of the chairs provided. "Yes, I'm afraid this weather has me a bit under it, so to speak." Nurbin immediately moved to fold the cloak neatly. "I am surprised you did not call in sick to work. Today would be a good day to not go into work. I almost wish I hadn't." "You were at work?" Torin asked as Nurbin finished folding the cloak and sat back down. "Yes," he said. "The bank would have let me take another day off to grieve, but I find that the work helps to distract me. Besides, the longer I stay out, the more difficult it will be when I get back." Torin nodded sagely, taking a sip from his 3rd mug of tea of the day. "Oh, yes, I know exactly what you mean. I must admit that's one of the things that made me reluctant to call in today." Torin then sat directly on the folded cloak. "It would take me longer to get out of the hole being gone for a day than it would for me to be out sick. I mean, you have the existing work, plus the old work. It just piles up." Nurbin did not answer, as he was staring dolefully at the cloak that Torin's rump was now disturbing the neat folds of. Danthres then spoke from the center corner of the room. "We had a few more questions for you, Mr. Nurbin. Did you or your wife know any wizards?" Her presence startled Nurbin, who apparently hadn't known she was there. He looked up from his stricken examination of Torin disturbing his cloak. "Excuse me? No, we did not know any wizards. I do not see how that is possible. Wizards do not consort with the likes of us." "But they use banks," Torin said, sliding off the table, which caused the cloak to fall to the floor in a heap. "Are you sure you didn't help one out with his account?" Nurbin got up from the chair, then bent over to pick the cloak up. "Believe me, Lieutenant, they would not let someone as low in the hierarchy as me work on an account with a wizard. Only the senior officials at the bank deal with those." He neatly folded the cloak and put it back on the table. Danthres started to move toward the table. "And you've never encountered any wizards anywhere else? There wasn't one tutoring one of your sons, say?" Now Danthres sat down on the cloak. Her armor protected her from the garment's wetness, for which she was grateful. "I do not believe so. Why are you asking these questions?" Again, Nurbin started looking at the cloak with an apprehensive expression. "I never met any wizards until that strange little old man who came with you two. In fact, I thought he said it was a rancid demon that killed Tybet and the boys. Can't you just find the demon?" "Well, that's the problem, Mr. Nurbin," Torin said. "We can't seem to locate it. The only way that's possible is if the demon was conjured by a wizard and then banished again. So we thought that perhaps you or your family might have had congress with one." "Would you like a pastry, Mr. Nurbin?" Danthres got up from the table, knocking the cloak askew, though it did not fall to the floor this time. "Sergeant Jonas's wife makes some excellent pastries for us every morning." Nurbin leaned forward and again folded the cloak neatly. "No, thank you. I do not eat in the morning." "Right, you told us that yesterday, yet there were 2 biscuits left." Torin added, "The biscuits looked quite good." Yes, Tybet was an excellent cook," Nurbin said, still in the monotone, though Danthres noticed that his mustache was now twitching. "She saved them for me, but I did not eat them. I told her that I did not eat breakfast anymore. She chose to ignore this, even though I explained why to her." Torin walked across the room, passing close to Danthres. "I suppose that..." His arm collided lightly with Danthres, but it was the one in which he had held the tea. The beverage spilled over onto the cloak. "Oh, I'm so sorry," Torin said. "That was clumsy of me." Danthres reached for the cloak. "That's terrible. We didn't mean to do that." "That is all right," Nurbin said, also reaching for the cloak. "I am sure I can get it cleaned." Danthres gripped the cloak. No, we can do that. After all, we're the ones who stained it." No, really," Nurbin said, also gripping the cloak. "Really, I will just fold it, and I insist, Mr. Nurbin." "Please," Mr. Nurbin said, tugging harder on the cloak. "If you will just let go of it, I can..." Danthres in turn tugged even harder on it. "We have a cleaning service that did a wonderful job of getting your wife and boy's blood off my boots. I'm sure they can do the same for..." "Please, just let go of the damn cloak before I..." Danthres dropped the cloak and had her sword out of its scabbard in one fluid motion. Next to her, Torin did likewise. Sebru Nurbin reared his head back and screamed to the ceiling, even as his skin rippled and changed color to an unfortunate shade of green. His form expanded, tearing through his clothing, and his hair seemed to disappear. He had transformed into a rancid demon. A second later, the demon seemed to be bound by strings of bright light. Magic, Danthres thought with a sigh. Bonin had long ago warded the castle so that any unauthorized magical creature was immediately bound upon its entry or appearance. So unsheathing the sword had been wholly unnecessary, though that didn't stop Danthres from keeping it out, just in case. "Well," Torin said after a second, "that was interesting." Blowing out a breath, Danthres said, "I was hoping that disturbing his neatness routine might get a good response, but this was rather beyond expectations." The door to the interrogation room slammed open to reveal 2 guards and Bonin. "What happened? My wards are going off like..." He stared at the former Mr. Nurbin. "What in the name of Tamisa's left toe is that?" Torin grinned. "That, Bonin, is Sebru Nurbin. Normally calm enough to lull any sane person to sleep, when he is angered, say by his wife preparing him breakfast, for even though he no longer eats breakfast, he changes into a rancid demon." "He was cursed," Bonin pointed at the strings of light. "See the orange tinge around the restraints?" Following Bonin's finger, Danthres did indeed see a slight orange cast to the light. "That indicates that this is a demon cursed to share its existence with a mortal. My guess is that it was the demon that committed some transgression." "Makes sense," Torin said with a wide smile. "What worse fate for a demon that indulges in chaos than to be trapped within a human who is the epitome of order?" Benin nodded. And what better punishment than to let it come out every once in a while, to get a taste of reality before being banished back inside Nebrin here. He shook his head. I shudder to think how this will fall out jurisdictionally. Are they both responsible for the crime? Torin shrugged. That's the magistrate's headache, not ours. It seems, Danthres said to the ME with great reluctance, that we were both right, Benin. Benin harumphed. Well, of course I was right. The remarkable thing is that you managed the feat. Snarling, Danthres briefly held up her sword, then thought better of it. Paperwork, she reminded herself. And that's the story. You'd have a hard time finding Here Then Roar, but the story is reprinted in Tales from Dragon Precinct, which is currently available from the fine folks at Eastbeck Books, which has 9 other Dragon Precinct stories in it as well, most of which I've read in this reading series. Check me out online at DeCandido.net. Read my blog at DeCandido.wordpress.com. And if you could support me on Patreon.com/KRAD, that would be fantastic. Thank you very much, and please stay safe.